Hi, I'm Mike for the Boy in a Band community tutorials, and this is Reason 7. Today I would like to go over with you my drum rig for my tracks. This tutorial assumes you have some working knowledge of Reason, and doesn't take the time to thoroughly explain the basics. Here we have a work in progress I've created recently. This track uses my latest drum configuration, and here's what it sounds like. I will jump around to a few different sections. So, here's how the drums sound on their own. I'd like to think they sound fairly realistic. However, keep in mind that the way that I mix and master my drums is not closely related to popular rock and metal artists. I prefer my drums to be a bit more in your face. You will have to mix and master your drums to your taste as well. First things first, you can see that my drums are all in one note lane. This particular kit has a lot of sounds in it. I find that programming this kit is much easier if they're all in one note lane. Now there are reasons you would want to split it up into multiple note lanes, but that is again for another tutorial. So let's get to the grid of the build. In this rack here on the right, you can see are all the drums. I've gone for a particular strategy here. That strategy is to try and simulate a live recording setup. So as you see, I have these channels labeled kick mic, snare mic, and overheads. Ready to get confused? Alright, let's start at the root of it all. This is the combinator used to trigger all of the samples. This combinator is the one that shows up in my sequencer. It contains 5 samplers, and each one associates itself with a different part of the kit. We have the kick, snare, hi-hats, cymbals, and toms. Inside of each sampler, you can see that there are a lot of samples connected to one key. I've chosen to use a particular set of samples from the Salamander drum kit from Posterous.com. Unfortunately, these specific samples are no longer available through official means, but these principles will work with any kit designed in a similar way. This pack was originally designed for VSTs that use an SFZ format. However, I use Reason, so I had to find another way. So each key here has multiple samples for each piece. Each piece has been recorded at 2 or more velocities and recorded multiple times at each velocity. So here we have the F recorded 11 times, the FF 12, and the P up to 9. All of these samplers use the exact same technique. So how do I get the right sample to fire? I'm glad you've asked. Here I will be opening up the keyboard, and I will select zone via MIDI. When I select the zone, you can also see that I have Alt enabled. This alternates at random between the notes assigned to the same key or group. So I get a different sample every strike, and this helps with some of the realism. Each group in these samples also has group mono enabled. This keeps the long samples from overlapping. Now you may have noticed that this was only hitting the FF sample. If I turn down the velocity on my keyboard here to say 30, it changes what sample it targeted. I accomplished this by selecting the velocities for each one of these samples. You can select multiples, and then adjust these values. Here we have 1 through 40. My FFs are 81 through 127, and the Fs are 41 to 80. Also, the hi-hats are in one large group. They're not divided. So if I make a transition from open to closed to open again, it will not continue to resonate. Was that confusing enough? Good. Now on to the really fun part, the wiring. As I said before, the strategy here was to make sort of a fake live recording setup. So let's just follow the kick for now. The output goes straight out of the combinator into our kick mix channel. Inside, we have a compressor, which I'm mostly just using to boost the volume. These splitters carry the signal to the quote-unquote microphones. Now I've done the same technique with each part of the kit. They all split to a different microphone, where each different part is filtered and changed in volume. This way, we simulate what you might hear in that microphone. So you can hear there's small parts of the rest of the kit coming through the kick mic, as it would in the real world. So let's give the snare mic a listen. Now you'll notice in this one, I've added some light reverb. Now I could have added this using inserts, but I'm already running really thin on inserts on the SSL. So now, let's move on to the overhead mic. Let's give it a listen. Now maybe it was obvious, maybe it wasn't, but there's a little bit of ducking there. I've taken the kick and the snare signal, and I'm using it to the side chain. I've also gone ahead and decided to use the technique where we can use the Thor for a filter, so I could get a bit of a high pass out of it. So there you have the wiring. Let's go ahead and go to the mixer. I'll start by showing you the grouping really fast. I have the drums wet and the drums dry. Dry are the samples directly input. It sounds really good on its own, but it lacks a bit of the imperfection. Here's the wet signal. Now I don't think either one should be left alone. I feel that both of them together complement each other extremely well. So let's go ahead and do some minor details. I've created parallel channels for the kick's click, the pop of the snare, and the high shelf for the overheads. These channels have been compressed. Now where I'd like them to be is just under with this red bar here, which I think I may need to change. It is, after all, a work in progress. On to the EQ. And these settings will be different depending on the samples that you use and the sound that you're looking for. This is just what I've gone for. I put a small bump right around 44 Hz or so in the kick, just to give it a little bit more of a thump. I wanted the option to bring out the click in the kick drum, so I've made this parallel channel right here for the drum kick. The snare did not require any real EQ work, as I was very happy with the way it sounded, but I did want the option to bring out the pop a little bit more where I could. And again, I have the parallel for the overhead high shelf. You can see that the setting is quite extreme, but considering how low the volume is, that's a little unimportant. So there you have it. That's my super complex drumming rig setup. I understand that this tutorial may very well have just opened up more questions than it has answered, so feel free to swing by the Boy in a Band forum and ask me any questions involving this subject. I'll be more than happy to answer them for you.